Speakers of Guga an Australian Aboriginal language that lacks words for left and right, instead describing all spatial relationships using absolute cardinal directions like north and south, develop a remarkably precise, constantly updated sense of compass orientation that most English speakers never develop at all. Does the specific language we speak actually shape how we think, not just how we communicate? This question, debated for nearly a century, has produced some genuinely surprising answers. The strong version of the linguistic relativity hypothesis, often called linguistic determinism and associated with early, less nuanced interpretations of Benjamin Whorf's work, claimed that language rigidly determines and fundamentally limits the range of thoughts a speaker is even capable of having, such that speakers of different languages would be entirely unable to conceive of ideas or distinctions that their native language lacks specific vocabulary for. This strong deterministic version has been comprehensively rejected by modern research, since speakers can clearly learn, discuss, and conceptually grasp ideas for which their native language has no single dedicated word. The weak, considerably more defensible version of the hypothesis, properly called linguistic relativity, proposes that the specific language a person speaks subtly influences habitual patterns of attention, categorization, and the relative ease or speed of certain cognitive tasks, without rigidly determining or limiting what thoughts are fundamentally possible for that speaker to have. This weaker, more nuanced version has received considerably more empirical research support across several specific cognitive domains studied using rigorous cross-linguistic experimental methods. Research on languages like Guga, which require speakers to describe spatial relationships using absolute cardinal directions, such as north and south, rather than relative terms like left and right common in English, finds that speakers of these languages develop remarkably precise, constantly updated spatial orientation abilities, correctly indicating cardinal directions even in unfamiliar environments or after being spun around disoriented, a striking cognitive skill that speakers of relative spatial term languages like English typically do not develop to nearly the same degree, providing strong evidence that habitual linguistic categories shape actual habitual attention and cognitive skill development. Cross-linguistic research on languages with grammatical gender, in which nouns are categorized as masculine or feminine, such as Spanish or German, finds that speakers subtly but measurably tend to describe and characterize inanimate objects using traits stereotypically associated with the object's grammatical gender in their native language. German speakers, whose word for bridge is grammatically feminine, tend to describe bridges using traits like elegant and beautiful, while Spanish speakers, whose word for bridge is grammatically masculine, tend to describe the same bridges using traits like strong and sturdy. Research on time cognition finds cross-linguistic and cross-cultural variation in how time is conceptually represented, often through spatial metaphor. English speakers typically conceptualize time moving horizontally, describing the future as ahead and the past as behind, while Mandarin speakers additionally and more frequently use vertical spatial metaphors for time, describing earlier events as up and later events as down, and speakers of these different languages show measurably faster response times when reasoning about time using spatial arrangements that match their language's characteristic metaphorical structure. The current, carefully qualified scientific consensus on the Whorfian hypothesis supports the weak version of linguistic relativity. Language measurably shapes habitual patterns of attention, categorization speed, and default ways of thinking about specific domains, including space, time, and gendered characterization, without rigidly determining or limiting the fundamental cognitive capacities or possible thoughts available to speakers of any given language. This nuanced middle ground position replaced both the earlier strongly deterministic view and an equally simplistic dismissal of any meaningful relationship between language and thought. The Whorfian hypothesis, refined from its original strong, deterministic form into a more nuanced, empirically supported weak version, reveals that language is not merely a neutral tool for communicating preformed thoughts. It subtly, measurably shapes habitual attention, categorization, and cognitive processing in specific, well-documented ways, without ever rigidly limiting what any human mind is fundamentally capable of thinking.